Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Netherlands Institute here in Athens. I'm very happy to have the next TEXNH talk today in our institute. And before I go into the details of who is going to be speaking and the topic of it, I would like first of all to mention the next lectures of our program. So on the 20th of September, we will take a break for the summertime. I think everybody would be very happy about a break for the summer. The first talk after the summer is on the 20th of September by Dr. Despotiko, and she'll be talking on Hellenistic glass production and how glass production uses also ceramic and metal production lines within the production of this material. So she'll be very much talking about the cross-craft interaction between those three different pyrotechnological affairs. So I'm looking forward to her talk. On the 18th of October, we have Dr. Athena Boletti, who's a Marie Curie Fellow at Leiden University. And she'll be working and talking to us about the experiments she has been conducting this year, and more specifically on the interaction between the use of stone tools and polishing and grinding materials, like emery, for example, which is a very important material extracted here in Greece, and the effect of that and the traces of that in monumental stone constructions of the Bronze Age. And on the 8th of November, we have Dr. Eleni Konstantinidis-Ivridi, who is one of the co-organizers of this series, working at the National Museum, Archaeological Museum in Athens, and her topic still needs to be confirmed, but we're talking about it. And in between the TEXNH lectures, we have on the 12th of October, for anyone who's interested in what NIA, so the Dutch Institute in Athens, is doing in terms of courses, but also in terms of fieldwork, the annual reports meeting. And I would first like to introduce the two speakers, or the one speaker and the discussant today. So the speaker we have today is Dr. Erica Angliker, who studied archaeology and linguistics and obtained an MA degree from Columbia University and a second one from the Universidade Estadual de Campinas in Brazil in both of these fields. She obtained her PhD from the University of Zurich, and she has published extensively on the material culture of different cults in Greece, but equally on their less tangible aspects, and this will feature largely in today's presentation. Her interests include island studies, the music and religious practices associated with Greek sanctuaries, the relationship between landscape and religion, the worship of the Greek gods, archaeology and ritual and travel, religion and travelogues. So a substantial amount of research topics of interest here. Currently, Erica is completing her first manuscript entitled Sanctuaries and Religious Practices in the Cycladic Archipelago from the Archaic to Classical Periods. Erica is working as a research fellow at the British School at Athens and as an adjunct lecturer in classical studies at the Unicamp Institute for Advanced Studies in Brazil, for which she also directs the summer school here in Greece. She is a member of the scientific staff of the Despotiko excavations, about which she has published several papers. And it's related to this site and this islet that she will talk to us today about the soundscape of the sanctuary of Apollo at Despotiko, music, memory, and dancing floors. Before I give Erica the floor, I just want to mention also some short introduction to Sanne Hoffman. Dr. Sanne Hoffman holds an MA in classical archaeology from the University of Copenhagen and a PhD from Aarhus University, and is currently assistant director at the Danish Institute in Athens since September 2022. Prior to that, she was both project and postdoctoral researcher at the collection of classical and Near Eastern antiquities in the National Museum of Denmark. She has taught courses on Greek religion from an archaeological perspective at the University of Copenhagen and has participated in archaeological field projects in Greece, Cyprus, Italy, Ukraine, and Denmark. And she says both below and under and above water. Sanne's primary field of research is Greek cults, in particular rituals, dedicatory practices, and the structure and use of sacred space. She's currently in the process of publishing her PhD thesis entitled Between Deity and Dedicator, the Life and Agency of Greek Votive Terracotta Figurines, and is also part of the dissemination project In the House of the Goddess, which is recreated at the Athana Lindia Sanctuary on Rhodes in a virtual reconstruction for use at the National Museum in Denmark. And sort of comparing the two bios of our two ladies today, I think they are an excellent match for a good discussion. Erica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you and Brisbart for the kind invitation to present my research on music at Despotiko and Paros at the series at TEXNH. I also extend my thanks to Sanne Hoffman for agreeing to be the discussant for this paper, and everyone at the Netherlands Institute in Athens involved in the organization, and those attending in person and online. Last but not least, I would like to extend my thanks to Dr. Angela Bellia from the National Research Council in Italy, who has been a source of inspiration and has supported my investigations in the field of music over many years. And naturally, I am indebted to Janusz Kurajos and Cornelia Dijf for the permission to study the materials of Despotiko. So, let's go now to the talk. In the contemporary world, music is normally experienced as a phenomenon detached from other events. Indeed, in today's society, we either experience music, we experience music as a background filler, for example, music playing in shops, bars, or in concert halls. In ancient Greece, by contrast, music was rarely performed in places dedicated exclusively to the appreciation of this art. Instead, it was integrated into the very fabric of social life. Music existed in homes where women sang while weaving, and at the gymnasium, symposia, and in markets, and also, naturally, at sanctuaries. And here is one place on the sanctuary at Delos, where we probably had that can be associated with music and maybe dances. Music and sounds were crucial in the religious sphere and was particularly prominent in ancient Greek sanctuaries. Various ancient texts, for example, describe how music, generally accompanied by elaborate dancing, was regarded as a prestigious offering to the gods, and this was a gift equivalent in value to costly items, serving as means of establishing communication with the gods and helping worships to recall the mythical narratives associated with the cultic sites. Music was particularly important at rituals events, processions, feasts, prayers, animal sacrifices, rites around cult statues, and so on, that were part of the religious activities practiced at the sanctuary. In addition, music was used both to enhance the sensorial experience of cults and to facilitate the memorization of the repetitive actions essential to rituals. Over the decades, musicology studies have paid a great deal of attention to the performative aspect of music, with a special focus on the connection between song and poetry in the archaic and classical period. Scholars have sought to understand the impact of theories of harmony and acoustic on the execution of music. Several studies also have been devoted exclusively to the role of music performed at human, rural, and pan-Hellenic festivals at sanctuaries. Within the framework of these studies, inns, paeans, dithyrambs have received special attention. Songs such as the Hymn of Apollo of Delos, for example, which has come down to us in good condition, are amongst the most valuable sources on the Aegean examples of congregated to the islands, congregations in islands for dancing and the performation of music. By contrast, the multifaceted experience of music in secret spaces of sanctuaries has only recently attracted scholarly study. Indeed, these recent studies have examined the social and cultural importance of music in the religious context by looking at the dedications of choroplastic statues of musicians and the spaces dedicated to the performance of music. And here, the collection of telests where several of these topics are studied in a kind of an annual publication. Within this context, the study of music instruments presented as votive has proven especially promising. Various instruments such as alloy, bells, are being carefully examined with regard to the dedicatory practice at multiple sanctuaries. Along these same lines, scholars are investigating musical practice at sanctuaries and the logistic and the transfer of knowledge within families of musicians who offered their services at various festivals held at these sites. Particular attention is devoted to the long understood spaces for musical performance, and some thought is also being given to the acoustic properties of these spaces in relation to religious practice. Library texts inform us that choral dances, for example, were a vital part of the religious life of many ancient Greek sanctuaries. Nevertheless, the spatial of architectural buildings associated with choral performances are not always easily to identify. The difficulty to associating a building with a very specific function is actually a characteristic of the sacred buildings generally in Greece. The sacred buildings at the Greek sanctuaries often serve several functions. For example, some temples could serve as spaces for housing the cult statue of the god, and at the same time for ritual meals among the members of the elite. With the exception of the altar, which was clearly used for sacrifice, none of the other religious spaces has a single function, and these include temples, stores, banquet rooms, and gathering halls. These aspects could be used in various ways for multiple functions. One excellent example of a building with double function comes from the Sanctuary of Apollo at Despotiko, where the structure is used as a temple and as an hestiatorium. So, the buildings used for the buildings and the spaces used for the performance of music can be associated with several buildings on the sanctuary. And what I will try to do on my study is associate some buildings of the Despotiko with the performance of music, because there is not a very specific music, a very specific building for the performance of music and dances. So, continuing here. So, despite these difficulties, recent studies have addressed the function of certain buildings with respect to the performance of music, and the altar is always a very good candidate to the performance of music, because through literature we know that the sacrifices was accompanied by music, by song, and by dance, and we have materials from evidence from vases and also from the literature giving this information to us. So, and as we are going to the sanctuary of Despotiko, before I enter in some details about the spaces and the objects used for related to the music and dance performance at Despotiko, I want first to present a brief introduction to this sanctuary that I think that will be useful in order that you can put everything into a broader context. So let's go to the sanctuary of Despotiko, and this is the location of Despotiko in the central Aegean, and it is an uninhabited island. Today, a shallow channel separated the islet of Theory from Despotiko, but this was dry land in antiquity, forming a low isthmus connecting these islets. The archaeological research conducted at the site since 1997 has brought to light a large sanctuary dedicated to Apollo that includes at least 26 buildings. The earliest cult activity dates to the early Iron Age, roughly 900–800 BC, and is attested by a heavily damaged architectural structure found in 2 spots at the sanctuary. Mainly 2 spots, because some other things were found also in other places, but these are the 2 main spots for the geometric evidence. The identity of the divinity worshipped at the site as Apollo was established based on numerous archaic vases found there inscribed with the name of the god. In addition, there is some evidence, though less prominent, of a cult of Artemis at the site, in particular a base and a torso from a statue of the goddess. Regarding the use of the sanctuary on Despotiko, the peak of the activity occurred in the second half of the 6th century, when a terminus protected by 3 gates was gradually erected. Also during the Archaic period, Building Alpha was constructed to serve as the main cult structure in the sanctuary. This building consisted of a temple, rooms A1 and A2, and a stiatorium, rooms A3, 4, and 5. In this same building, in room A1, a votive deposit was discovered consisting of an enormous variety of finds, including terracotta figurines, several types of Corinthian ceramics, vases in the form of animals, seals, gold items, bronze fibula, objects from Egypt, Syria, and Cyprus, and agricultural tools and weapons. And here are more some objects from the deposit, including several figurines. One of the most remarkable finds at Despotiko is a terracotta figurine in the Daedalic style, dating to 680 BC. The main altar in the sanctuary stood in the exact center of the terminus, directly across the temple. A few meters south of the terminus lies the South Complex, dating to the late Archaic period, which was built over the earlier structures. It includes building units theta and ypsilon. Despotiko also had a great number of facilities and rooms located outside the sanctuary. And here you can have an idea about the other rooms found outside the sanctuary, including a tower. It's not clear yet if the tower was a defensive tower or a tower for observation. It's located in a very difficult area to be excavated, and so it needs more work till we can understand the function of this structure. I draw particular attention to the most splendid dedications found at the sanctuary, the archaic sculptures of Koroi and Koroi, and many of these sculptures were found as reused material in the South Complex and also other parts outside of the sanctuary. And here a little bit more of the sculptures. On the islet of the cemetery, once connected to Despotiko, 80 buildings have been found that were used for storage, along with the structure I mentioned that looks like a dancing floor. Despotiko, and here is the structure in the islet of the cemetery that seems to be a dancing floor, and during this presentation I will argue why I think that this structure is a dancing floor. So, let's take a look now on the materials at the Despotiko, link them to the performance of music and dance. And I want to start with this seal, which is made of ivory and depicts 5 figurines. This seal was found on room A1 on the temple, together with the votive deposit that I just presented. So, and here the seal, which was actually used as a pendant. The seal is made of ivory, and it depicts 5 human figures holding hands, thus clearly indicating dancing. Similar image that appears on this similar image appears on geometric and archaic vases. I mean, a similar rendering of this type of schematic figures, because this specific image is exclusive for this seal. The figures are very schematically represented, so that even their gender is impossible to determine. The manner in which the faces are rendered gives the impression that the artisan wished to depict open mouths to indicate that the figures are singing or otherwise generated sound. A similar rendering of the faces can be found on a pendant from the Delion of Paros, where is also depicted a dancing scene. And here you see the 2 figures are dancing with the opened mouth. Zose Papadopoulos' detailed analysis of this pendant suggests indeed that the figures are singing. The people depicted on the seal from the Despotiko form 2 groups, 3 on the right and 2 on the left, who are exchanging glances. Although the figures are schematically rendered, one may observe that they differ slightly in terms of height and complexion. This depiction of a heterogeneous group provides us with the information necessary to hypothesize the ritual context of this gathering as a dance. Although difficult to prove, it's possible that this dance is the famous dance of the cranes mentioned in the poem of Callimachus. It is known, in fact, that this dance was performed by men and women arranged in a line with shorter people placed at each end. On Delos, the dance of the cranes is attested by several ancient authors, including Plutarch, as well as the Callimachus. The poet says that the dance was established in Delos by Theseus and his companions after the return on Crete after the slaying on the Minotaur in the labyrinth. The dance was meant to mimic the movements inside the labyrinth, and on the sacred island of Delos, it was performed around the Keraton, the sacred altar of Apollo, built from the horns of goats hunted by his sister Artemis. And it's very interesting that these 2 seals depicting a dancing scene, both are produced by the Parians, both dedicated to Apollo in 2 different sanctuaries. And on the seal from the Delion, that this is a dance of the crane involved with the labyrinth, is clearly indicated because the labyrinth depicted here on the back of the pendant. And both objects, this iconography are found only on these 2 objects. So it seems to be an object produced especially to be dedicated at the sanctuary. It's not a mass production object. My impression is that this was an ordered object, perhaps by a singer, perhaps by a dancer. This is difficult to know, but it is striking the, how can I say, the singularity of these two objects. So, let's go now to... Despotiko also revealed other objects with images of dancing that may be indicative of ritual practice at the sanctuary. This large fragment of a pitos, with dates to the early 16th century, shows 3 female figures moving to the right. That they are dancing is clearly indicated by their holding hands. All the figures have the same facial complexion. Garments and coiffure and are at the same size. They also wear a high poly, which indicated that they are either divinities or priestesses. With their hands joined, the dancers seem to be executing uniform steps. Although they are shown in a line, the methods for them, the models for them would have been in a circular formation similar to those encountered today in Mediterranean and Balkan traditions. Cycladic relief pitos are one of the objects associated with the sudden general reappearance of figurative art in Greece after the long picturesque hiatus lasting from the late Bronze Age. After the late Bronze Age. This is a complex phenomenon that cannot be analyzed here. However, figure of representation, like on these pitos, were inspired by both Oriental objects that began to circulate in Iron Age sanctuaries and by revival of Bronze Age techniques and images. As for the fragment of Despotiko, we cannot infer from it a link with any particular mythological narrative. Nevertheless, as Notakuru has shown in her studies of the pitoi, even the simple compositions and the representation of existing themes seem to point to a decorative purpose. As she argues, representations such as those of bands, of animals, or dances had symbolic value and alluded to local cultic rituals. In the case of the pitos fragment from Despotiko, the dance represented may be of a chorus of women associated with the cult of Apollo. The fact that the vase is a handmade local product suggests that it was fabricated with local mythologies and stories in mind. In such a context, it is not difficult to imagine that the celebrations of Delian divinities may have captured the imagination of the artisans. Also curious is the occurrence of a similar phenomenon on the neighboring island of Delos. An amphora dedicated in the Artemisian found in the islands, bearing depictions of the chorus of female dancers with long garments on its lower band, confirms that this type of image was suitable for sanctuaries dedicated to the Delian divinities. One may ask whether the representation of these dances refers to an actual event that took place at the sanctuary. Studies of the iconography of dance reveal that images of dancing on vases were not based purely on the invention of the artisans, but rather, even when referring to mythological dances, they capture the artisan's interpretation of actual dances. The dances depicted at the Despotiko pitoi would probably have induced the memories of a real and mythological dances performed in honor of Apollo. Although the pitos was located in a storage area that was probably not meant for dancing, its large size would give the figures a monumental character, and the depictions would have reminded the viewers of the ancient and the current celebration. Whatever the dances represented on the pitos from Despotiko referred to a mythological tale or real performance at the sanctuary, they would certainly have helped us set the appropriate stage for the ritual celebrated in the sanctuary. The images could make, present, and recall dances in honor of Artemis or Apollo, and thus return to the storage space into a space of imagined dances. And here is important to say that the Pythos was not found in situ. It was moved from the original area, but most likely belongs to the storage facilities because it was found close to this area. So, last, I come to one of the most intriguing structures found at the Despotiko. This circular structure was actually found at the islet of the cemetery, which was once, as I have told, connected to Despotiko before the rise of the sea level. The circular structure was found in an area where there are 8 other buildings. The materials and the buildings of the cemetery are still under study, but analysis of the ceramics found on these buildings have already indicated that this was an area used for storage and facilities. The circular structure is 26 meters, has 26 meters of diameter, and so is too big to be a tower in the archaic period. This fact supports the argument that this probably was a dancing floor. Dancing floors were common in ancient Greece. One of the earliest surviving literary references for dancing floor comes from the Iliad, Book 18, where Homer describes the shield of Achilles made by Hephaestus. The god hammers into the shield a dance of a young man and women amongst acrobats. In a simile, the poet also salutes Ariadne, the daughter of Daedalus, who built for the princess a dancing floor in the shape of a labyrinth. This sort of simile presents what was probably a dance familiar to the audience that mingled the ancient memories of the legendary Crete. Scholars have debated the extent to which the simile reflects the Bronze Age period, but the key point is that it must reflect dances familiar to the audience of the Iliad. Most probably, the technical dance vocabulary of the similes indicates the rapid tempo and the circular shape of the performance. Moreover, this passage from Homer indicates that especially circular dancing floors were long in use in ancient Greece and were important for the performance of music that accompanied them. Circular structures are natural for music and dance performance. Studies of a performance show that when dancers clap hands and step back extending their arms, the shape that they produce is not a square or a trapezoidal form, but actually a circle. The ability of circular forms to engage the people using this space into music and dance performance may explain the wide diffusion of circular spaces in ancient Greece. Among the well-known circular spaces for dance and music performance are the halos on the Sacred Way of Delphi, the circular areas in the sanctuary of the great goddess of Samothrace, and the theater of Dionysus in Athens. In addition, there are a number of altars and other spaces for the performance within circular structures in ancient Greece. For example, the altar in the sanctuary of Demeter in Acuda on Tassos, which was placed on a circular pavement. The Timele at Epidaurus, an enigmatic round building, also served as a space for the performance of music and in a kind of a labyrinthic dance. New theoretical approaches to this kind of evidence are responsible for the identification of these round structures as a space for the performance of music and dance. Dancing with circular movements in rituals for Apollo may also have taken place at the Delion on Paros, around the rock altar, where was found the aforementioned unique pendant, with a design featuring a pair of dancers on one side and a labyrinth on the other side. That seems to be a reference to the dance of Theseus in the labyrinth in the neighboring sanctuary of Apollo on Delos. Turning now to the cemetery, one may be wonder whether the circular structure here was linked to dancing. As we have seen, dances could also be performed in areas used for storage, as in the case of Pythos. The circle at the cemetery doesn't seem to support a structure very high as a tower. The circular structure also facilitated the movement of people and is appropriate for dances. Furthermore, studies of literary texts indicate that in ancient Greece existed structures that could be used for dancing and for agricultural purposes, such as the drying of grapes or preparation of food, etc. And again, we come to the multiple functions of several buildings. So, we still need to excavate properly this area and this circle. But I think that for the moment, there is a strong suggestion that this can be a dancing floor. First, because it cannot be a tower, and secondly, because more recent approaches on Greek on buildings, on sanctuary, shows that many structures had multiple functions, and there is not a building that is destined just for dance or even just for the couch statue. The buildings on the Greek sanctuaries, they had these multiple functions. So we can also imagine several functions for these structures too. Identifying structures and link objects with the performance of music and dance is not something easy, but I think that analyzing carefully the objects, it is possible. And there is not a vast amount of materials from Despotiko, but I think that they are very significant, particularly the pendant, because this is a personal object, has signs of use, and everything indicates that the pendant was dedicated at Despotiko after maybe a dancer or a music used it for quite some time. And this is the same thing for the pendant from the Delion in Paros. So, I guess that's what I have to say, and I hope that you have questions, because I know that all this material is, how can I say, here I'm working with a lot of hypotheses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Erica, and thank you for the very interesting talk. And also, what I find really important and very interesting is the way you highlight an aspect of the sanctuaries that is not visible in the archaeological material as easily. But with the iconography and the written sources, we get an impression of the music and the dance that took place, and can have a better attempt on envisioning them all together. So thank you for that, and also thank you for sharing these very interesting examples. I really enjoyed the talk on Despotiko, and also the round space is really interesting. So I might ask something more about that later. But first, I think I would like to, if I can start with the first question, is that okay? Laura, I'll keep it closer also. That helps. As I understood it, you talked mostly about music and dance as a kinetic offering, as in something that happens by the altar in front of the gods. But it might also be understood as something that the cultic community does together. And usually when we look for spaces for these kinds of performances, like when Hollinshead has a big study of spaces with steps or stairs, because that sort of often gives us a space where performance can take place, or we look for slopes. How would you understand the space around the altar as interacting with the space where performance takes place, but also a place where potentially spectators could be?
Well, on the case of Despotiko in particular, the altar is a semicircular altar, so it facilitates also the movement of people, and the area around it's a big area on which would be possible to have, how can I say, to congregate a lot of people to watch the performance of the rituals. Of course, in antiquity, probably the space was also occupied with statues, offerings, but even so, it's a large space. So I guess that you are right. The space around the altar also works for the performance of the rituals, for the performance of music, and also accommodate the people watching the rituals. But I think that if we expand this for sanctuaries in general, we need to look case by case, because each sanctuary has a specific configuration. For example, in some sanctuaries in Sicily, they had a kind of stairs where you could also sit and observe these rituals, and depend very much on the time that you are looking. But yes, I think that you raise a very good point.
But I think it's an interesting space, because it's, as you say, it's large enough to hold spectators, but it's still what is it called? It's still cutting off the view from the outside. There is a wall sort of making it limited.
Yes, makes limits because there is the wall of the terminals and the buildings. So yes, limited somehow the group.
And how would you sort of transfer the same question to the circular space? Because I looked at the pictures and I can't really, is it all flat around, or?
Well, the circular space, I think that, okay, we are speaking about a storage area. So maybe the dance is conducted there where, let's say, less formalized with the context of the ritual, but maybe some dances to celebrate some aspect of staging or something like that. Maybe it wasn't happening. It for sure is not a space for ritual, but if you go to literature where many of these dancing the dancing floors are mentioned, because it's something very interesting. The dancing floors, they appear on literature, but we hardly identify them. One, in the archaic period, as much as I know, there is only the one in Despotiko. In the Hellenistic period, we have more. For example, Joan Connolly, she identified a very similar structure on the islet of Hieronymus, but this is Hellenistic. And because these structures are structures that are more fragile, and they are somehow improvised, and they are not so spectacular, I think that they tend to disappear from the archaeological register. But dance was very important on every religious event, religious ritual, but dance and music was incorporated in all aspects of Greek life. So maybe at the cemetery wasn't a totally ritualized dance, but just a dance to commemorate. So I guess that what we needed to do is to abstract from our own society, where I mean, where dance is not so integrated to all aspects of life. The dance for us is kind of a background thing.
Yes, but that's actually an interesting point, because I did notice you sort of talked about music being something we watch more, but I would maybe say that at concerts there is still very much sort of a shared feeling. You still sort of have the music and the dancing and the interaction, so it still gives you something.
Yes.
Which is what it can do. I think it's part of why it's important for religious spaces to have this, because it creates some sense of unity.
Yeah, in terms of religion, there were kind of how can I say, because this is difficult to capture for us as archaeologists, as historians. Let's say, some is more or less spontaneous movements, like a prayer to the god, or and I guess that the anti-Semitism would be more associated in these how can I say, non-formalized festivals and things, I think. But who knows? It's difficult to. All these are. I can only make a hypothesis, because in the absence of written evidence is always difficult.
Should I start with the question from here? Yes. Angela Belia asks, do you think that there could be a relationship between this musical and choretic archaeological evidence and the rituals connected to the seasonal changes in this site?
Okay, let me read the question here, because there was a sorry, because I'm without the glass. Do you think that there could be a relationship between music and... Yes, I think that could be a relation between music and choretic archaeological evidence in Despotiko, connected with the seasons and the collecting and the storaging plants and agricultural products for. Yes, I think. Thank you, Angela, for the question.
Thank you for. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you for your interesting. I couldn't hear all of it. I'm sorry. It's something with the microphone. But I have about a detail. I have a question about the things you showed me. Yes, there were two people holding hands, and you said they were moving to the right.
Yes.
Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
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 So for the viewer, they would be moving to the right, but for the dancer, they would be moving to the left.
Yes.
Yes. And is there anything known in ancient Greece about the direction of movement to the right or to the left?
If there is some, to be honest, I don't know if I don't have this information. Sorry.
Can I add something? Yes.
Yeah.
Because I engage in Greek traditional dancing, and I know that they move to the right. I engage in Bulgarian dancing, and they move to the right. But some ritual dances, they move to the left. So it might be important to have this little aspect as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much. I will take a look on that. I think that you're right. I will take a look on that.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I would like to answer first to you about the directions in dancing, in ancient dancing. Even today, there are in Greece dances moving to the right or to the left, but there are some dances also in both sides. They change direction that happens. Not too many dancing, so it's not always it's connected to ritual or something. It's a part of the dance. But I know from the crane dance that they wanted to mimic the dances of the movement inside the labyrinth. That's why they started to offering this dance in Delos, because Apollo helped in all the situation. And when they arrived at Delos, they left Theseus and the maidens and boys from Athens and find survival there for a moment, they celebrated the god and they started dancing around the altars. And they were, and so the burden probably is connected to the crane dance because there is a crane depicted
Yes.
on the side. It is interesting that they are not connected, their hands are not connected, maybe they are jumping. Because their legs are, they have this S movement, they're not like in the seal, they're standing and holding hands, which is typical in geometric
Dances.
dancing. So maybe inside the labyrinth, they had to move directions in order to find their way out. So probably it was they were mimicking. So we're not sure about the direction. That's the answer about you. I wanted to ask you something. It was really interesting that they have a space, a large space that is flat and smooth. Homer mentioned that in the episode with Demodocus, when he stands in the middle of the dancing floor in the land of the Phaeacians, and he calls two servants to make a broaden and smoothen the surface. So that's an indication to find the dancing floor. But I'm perplexed about the location of this dancing floor, because the temple is right in, it has a really large rectangular area with a great altar in the middle. And probably they would dance, as you said, with music and accompanying the sacrifice and all that stuff around the altar, mimicking the crane dance, if they were dancing the crane in the island there, because it's another, they were dancing that in Delos. I'm not sure they were dancing the crane dance there. We're not sure, but why the dancing floor is so away and close to a cemetery is mentioned? Is it cemetery? Is it modern? Something else? I did not understand.
No,
it's
sorry.
ancient.
The cemetery was connected to the spot.
It's an ancient cemetery.
It's the same cemetery. Yeah, it's the same. It's not. The cemetery belonged to the Despotiko.
Okay.
It's the same. The thing
maybe I don't know. Maybe that dancing floor, if it's a dancing floor, it's connected to cemetery use.
But
it's strange that it's very away from the temple and the
yeah,
altar.
but look.
Why would they go there?
Because first of all, if we go to literature, some of these dancing floors they were actually located outside of the sanctuary. And second, because we know that, let's say, on the storage areas and so, they were also conducting some dances, not as part of a festival, but just to celebrate the harvest, for example. Just to say thank yous. And for example, there are some authors that even hypothesize that Pito deposited on the storage areas, they could have a dance to celebrate. And so this circle in the cemetery, if it's a dancing floor, is not a circle linked to the festivals, whatever festivals was celebrated in Despotiko, because we don't have evidence for that. And so it was a circle linked with dances linked with the harvest. But on the Dilion on Paros, where the pendant was found with the labyrinth, then I think that there is a strong suggestion for a dance of the cranes. At the Despotiko, I agree with you. It's just a hypothesis. As we have a sanctuary of Apollo, a big sanctuary of Apollo, and an Apollo that perhaps imitates the cult of Apollo on Delos, so perhaps the festivals also imitated. But all this is a hypothesis because there is no written evidence to tell us what happened on Delos, on Despotiko. So it's always a suggestion.
I think we have a question also online. From Emmanuel Aprilakis, if you turn on your mic.
Hi, thank you. I really liked your talk and I found parts of it convincing. I too tend to see a circular space and think, yep, dancing space, performative space. But I just want to push back on the idea that, all circular spaces are going to be dancing spaces by saying that not all dancing spaces are circular. In fact, you know, the earliest theater that we have, which is at Theory-IdEA-Unicamp, the Attic Dean site, is rectilinear, and it's maybe the only one that goes back to the Archaic period, maybe late 6th century. So I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that, and I guess in tandem, if there have been any other interpretations, you know, again, given the placement, if it's like a threshing floor or you know, anything along those lines. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your question. Now, here we need to be careful. You observed very well. It's not that all circular spaces are dedicated for dance. I guess that we needed to analyze the entire context and then suggest a dance. Then, for example, the round altar is a structure that facilitates movement, and we know that the people perform the rituals and music and dances around the altar. So the altar is an easy case. The circular space at the cemetery, it's a more difficult space to associate with as a dancing floor, because we don't have, how can I say, written evidence, but I think that the evidence is suggestive. So when I say that we have a dancing floor at the cemetery, I put as a hypothesis, because at this stage it's not possible to affirm with 100% of certainty, but because even in modern Greek, some of these spaces are used for dance and for, let's say, agricultural purposes. And we know from literature that the circular space was used for that. So I think that it's possible to build a hypothesis, but 100% sure, yeah, then it would be insecure to go into this way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erica, for a really good talk with lots of very interesting information and interesting, let's say, crossovers between spaces, activities, multiple use of spaces, multiple functions of spaces, and so on. Just to make sure that I understood everything correctly, you were talking about the storage spaces in cemetery. I assume that these storage spaces were used for agricultural produce or also other materials? And if that was the case, then we could talk indeed about potential dancing and maybe also music activities as a result of a successful harvest, as a question. And then I have another question after that.
Well, but we always need to think that all these facilities were linked at the cemetery, linked to the sanctuary of Despotiko. So if it's a harvest, it's because we didn't analyze the contents of pots, of vases, and so. But it's a storage. Despotiko is a huge sanctuary with a lot of people circulating there. So they needed to have supplies for the people visiting, and so for maybe priests who would perhaps even live permanently at the sanctuary. So in this case, yes. And there is more something. At the Despotiko, it's still not clear if there existed a little seat or not. So on the early periods. So all this also needs to be clarified. But yes. I guess that this is a structure linked with the harvest or storage or some moment like that.
So what exactly was found so that you were able to identify that area as a storage area?
Because were found the storage vases, many, and
Pitoi.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there is nothing indicating religious activity in these buildings. But I have to make an observation here. The excavations at the cemetery barely started, so maybe if we dig everything, and maybe the picture may change. So we are making this analysis from the surface material that we collected and studied.
Okay, thank you. And another question I have, or it's actually more, it's not even a comment, but more me thinking about what you mentioned at the very beginning of your talk, when you were saying that music is detached from other events in modern day context, let's say. And I'm thinking, the idea of, for example, the elevator music, as you were also mentioning, you know, music that sits in the background. And I did a little bit of thinking about it, because we call such music musak. And when you look up the word music and the concept of musak, this is actually music, especially composed, apparently already since the 30s or 50s for sure, for specific contexts where people are productive. And I thought that was especially important and interesting, because the idea is that the music either relaxes people, like in the elevator, before they have to go to an important meeting or to go to work, or such music was also used in specific productivity chain workshops and even factories, and designed and composed in such a way that it started slowly with a couple of instruments, and the music was getting louder and swelling on in intensity and rhythm, so that people would, in periods of 15 minutes for which this music was composed, to work harder and harder and harder. Then there would be a break, and then it would start all over again. So for me, this is sort of, if I think about it, this is music with a very specific purpose and a very interactive reason of existence in our current society. So I'm not entirely sure if we can say that music in our context, in our modern context, is that detached from our daily activities. What are your thoughts about that?
No, I guess that you're right. I guess that in some contexts, like you said, the music is planned to engage people in certain activities. There is this aspect, but. But sometimes, in how can I say, in many contexts, it is detached. But yes, I guess that I needed to nuance my position. Thank you for that.
There's also a question in the comments, but yes, from Eva Steele. Would a threshing floor be located in such a marginal area? Could that suggest dance instead? I think is the question.
Would a threshing floor be located in such a marginal area? Yes, is this what I already said? Is the place was connected to Despotiko, but the fact that it is in a kind of a storage areas is because probably it's a kind of a dance located linked with storage and not with festivals.
Can I just revisit the pitos for a final comment? Because I find the connection between dancing and storage, but still in a sacred site, a little bit interesting. So I'll just ask a little question, because once you put people dancing on a pithos or any kind of ship, really, you sort of get the circular movement as a gift, as a little gift. It's sort of static, but it's still sort of moving. So, as I understood it, you saw it as a reminder of a dance or a ritual in the storage area, but sort of speaking perhaps into the dancing floor close to storage areas, maybe it would also be sort of if we see imagery as more active or more sort of powerful as just being imagery, it could also be sort of a constant dance around the story, let's say harvest, or what is it?
I think that could work on both ways. Could work as a memory, you know, an evocation of a memory of dances, and of dances that would occur in these areas.
And then I'll just ask the final little question, because I was thinking the seal you have also with the people in the two groups, and you were arguing for this different sizes being a reflection of the sprawl in the end. But could it also perhaps, and this is probably a little bit of an annoying question, but be a matter of perspective instead, where they are also trying to show maybe a circular dance.
Perspective. I guess
Sort of
that
like
I wonder if perspective.
So the smaller ones would be more in the back, and then we get a bit of a sort of a round shape.
I don't know. I guess that in such an early times they didn't work so much in perspective as much as I understand them, and so I see. In Greek art, size is always used to mark social status and positions. Is it like this that I read this composition?
Thank you. There was.
Just one more question, because the talk has to do with soundscape, and you were mentioning dancing, which of course is connected, but how is sound there experienced? Because you've been there, so there's a very flat area, there's waves nearby, winds. It would be really interesting to hear more about how sound was or could be experienced by the performance or the musicians or the participants there, either on the circular space near the storage room or inside the temple around the altar and with all these facades surrounding the...
Thank you for the very interesting question. I guess that you are absolutely right. We have the sounds of the soundscapes. Everything counts. The ocean, the people, the noise of the animals. One thing that I wanted to do at some point is to conduct an experiment in the Despotiko cemetery to record the soundscape, and also it's important to record the soundscape not in a specific, not randomly, but on the specific time when probably the festivals of Apollo would happen, because we also have wind interfering, and so.
The first area around the altar is surrounded by facades, so maybe with the 3D modeling, one should reconstruct such an experiment. But the other area is open; there are no buildings, so the sound spreads.
Yeah.
So it needs, I don't know, maybe if it was crowded by people around it, so it would make, sorry.
Yeah. No, this is a very important point to mention. There are, including some people studying musicology, that they make experiments to see till where the sound could travel. Because, let's say, on a festival or in some meetings where you had a lot of people, many who were behind, they couldn't see the ritual, but they could hear. So the sound is what arrived for most of the people were reunited, because not everybody could be placed at the front.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting presentation indeed, and the site is wonderful. I just had a thought. I mean, I'm no expert in anyway, but the seal, if I understood correctly, the seal was found in the temple.
Yes.
Perhaps it is a more formal dance, a ritual dance that it depicts that even perhaps a direction that is different for the 3 figures and the 2 figures. Maybe they're meeting or something, suggestion, I don't know. And the other area we are talking about as a dance floor, in proximity with the storage spaces, it would be perhaps a more spontaneous dancing circle, in a circle with lots of people and louder and a different kind of thing
exactly.
than dancing inside the temple and near an altar. Suggestion.
No, but
excavation of the
no, but
area
it was
will show
exactly.
us
I
more.
don't know if it was clear. It was exactly this what I wanted to bring in this paper. The seal really indicated a more formalized dance, and probably because it's a very special object crafted for a single situation or for a single person has sign of use, and maybe was even dedicated by a professional dancer or for someone, because it looks to have a meaning. And the dependent from the Dylan also has a sign of use. This means that the person used it for a certain time and then dedicated. We know from later times that musicians, at the end of their careers, they dedicated the musical instrument at the sanctuary, or when they reached another stage in their career, they also dedicated them, or after participating in a number of festivals. So these two seals look to be, they are clearly linked to a more formalized situation, while at the cemetery would be perhaps a less formalized. And why I say perhaps? Because many dances sometimes they were meant to the gods, the gods to see, and not to the humans. And in this sense, it doesn't matter where it's located. If you wanted to say thanks to the god for a harvest, etc., you can make your dance in this space.
I have a comment and a little question, and then we'll cut it. Just for a comment, it would be interesting if you ever have the possibility to build a little model of the sanctuary and test the acoustics, because one thing is that it's sort of a courtyard, but it also has still the column row where you would use that space for acoustic sort of enhancement. But all in due time, I think. And then just a final question I will take myself. Is there any finds that point to the kinds of instruments from the sanctuary, or any finds from maybe Delos or Paus where you have an idea of what kind of instruments they would be using for these kinds? Because that's also sort of, if you want the full picture of the soundscape, it's nice to know which instruments.
Okay, yeah. Well, musical instruments, they hardly survived as votive objects, but on the Delian, on Paros was found a fragment of an alloy, and this is an indicator. But alloy, on the other hand, were common instrument used for during to produce music for sacrifices, etc. But yes, we have in Despotiko there were found no musical instrument. We have this alloy from the Delian on Paros. Is a very rarely found. I guess that because it was found within the sanctuary. I guess that in Selinunte there was also found an alloy in Selinunte in situ. So on the Delian it was moved, but probably belonged to the votive deposit. It was found on the area of the sanctuary, but probably was moved from the deposit. So this is an indication, but about the instruments used during the execution of the rituals.
Just a final attached comment. And are there any terracottas with? There are no terracotta figurines or any figurines with any kind of instruments to be shown?
Not at Despotiko or at Delian. No, we have terracotta figurines, but not with instruments. Yeah.
Thank you. Then I will give the floor.
Erica, thank you very much for a really good talk, for filing all our questions, and I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as we did here. And I would like to invite everybody here at least for a drink. Thank you very much also for everybody who is with us online, and we'll see you back after the summer. Thank you.